Hi, Bentley. First, congratulations on being a part of the New York African Film Festival. This is for your feature, Revolution from Afar. And so, very happy to meet you. I've heard about you. I don't think we've ever met in person or even virtually. Um, so before we get into the film, I just want to kind of find out about your journey because you have a very interesting past, just to give people context of who you are and how you came about to making this film. So if you can just tell me
Absolutely.
kind of a little bit about your background and yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to talk about the film today. And a huge thanks to the New York African Film Festival as well. It is an honor to be part of it. I'm very excited. I started making films actually as a teenager in Chad, where I grew up. So I was from the US originally, from Texas, and moved as a kid with my family to Chad, where my dad and mom both worked for a medical nonprofit organization. So in a way, I had my own identity transformation and formation that was happening throughout that time, in which I'm this like American white kid plopped into Chad and started learning Chadian Arabic, which is very similar to Sudanese Arabic, as well as French, just to get by as a kid. And yeah, that's where I grew up. So when I started making films, it was with friends of mine, many of whom were involved in theater, like they were theater actors. They did sketches for local events at a local cultural center, for example, as well as playing a lot of sports. And we added movies to our hobbies. So that's my intro into filmmaking, but it also ties into one of the common themes of films that I've worked on, especially Revolution from Afar, which is what happens when people move from one place to another.
Right. And how did you, and how is, what was your journey into, I guess, you've lived in Sudan as well, or do you always just kind of go visit, or like, what's your relationship, I should say, to Sudan? And how
So
did you get there? Yeah.
Sudan is interesting too. So this provides further context for this film here. In Chad, Sudan's president Omar al-Bashir was I would say kind of like a popular figure, especially in the northern part of Chad where I lived. Like I already mentioned, the Arabic dialect is very similar to Sudanese Arabic. Culturally, Chad and Sudan share much in common. Many of the ethnicities, tribes, customs, even humor, stand-up comedy videos go viral across both countries, and especially from Sudan to Chad. So a lot of it's imported from Sudan. It's kind of funny because in the era in which Black Lives Matter has become like finally a popular topic, like a mainstream space of discourse. A lot of my Sudanese friends are struggling with being accepted by Arab communities
Right.
who degrade them because of that. The funny thing is, Chad looks up to Sudan almost along like I don't know how best to say it other than like shadist lines. So anything from Sudan was like better culture. It was the right way to do
Interesting.
things. The chefs are Sudanese. The musicians that are popular are Sudanese. So I grew up consuming Sudanese culture in that regard, like right or wrong. So when I came back to the US for college, I went to Emory University in Atlanta, which is tied to the Carter Center, Jimmy Carter's post-presidential NGO that does a lot of election monitoring. So one of my first main jobs out of college, because I spoke Arabic and I grew up in Chad, was to actually go and be an election observer with the international delegation in Sudan. So we got to witness Omar Bashir and the National Congress Party's domination, I guess you could say, like firsthand. And when I moved to Sudan, I found that since I had grown up listening to the music and I was familiar with a lot of cultural customs and the dialect was so similar, I fit in really quickly. And a lot of Sudanese people, when they meet me, they don't even know the Chad background. They just assume that I speak Sudanese Arabic or that I grew up in Sudan. That's how close the two countries are tied.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That's cool. I mean, I don't know if you know, I'm from Sudan as well.
Mhm,
Born, grew up there till I was 8, and then was basically going back every year till I was 16.
mhm,
And then took a huge gap of not going because at that point my father left the UN, and he was like, you have to pay for your own ticket. And I was in college at that point. So I was like, nope.
Mm.
So I was basically here, and then I eventually went back. And then since then, since 2002, basically, I try to go as often as possible. So that's kind of more to say, just this film resonated with me. And I understood a lot of the nuance, as well as kind of was trying to look at it from both an outsider's point of view, as well as, someone from the community who also experienced the revolution from afar.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into the film.
Yeah.
And talk about, so I guess there's a lot of beautiful moments. There's a lot of interesting things that you covered. But what drove you to make this film?
Okay, so as I mentioned, Sudan's influence on Chad. I remember as a teenager seeing posters of Omar al-Bashir, the Sudanese president, in friends' bedrooms in Chad. We'd be hanging out, and there's like a Omar al-Bashir plus Idris Deby or minus, depending on the time, because they've also had like a political rift between the two. But both these countries had I guess you would call them dictators. I don't want to get too deep into it's very very subjective too, right? Because America has a dictator right now, so.
Speak on it.
But, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So both these countries had, I guess they're like presidents being elected who already have control of the vote. So there's no true choice by the people. There's no true
democratic. Like false democracy, right? It's like a
false democracy in a way. Yeah. And when I went to Sudan and lived there and worked as an election observer, you claim that your job is politically neutral, that you don't have any, leanings one way or the other, but nothing's neutral. And there's nothing, even a film like this, there's not a single moment without some sort of bias or perspective that's being brought to the table. And I had this weird feeling where I despised the sort of Arab-centric ideology that Bashir put forward, while also looking around me and seeing that Sudan was overall economically a better country than Chad. It's a really weird feeling. And what I like for films and for discussions like this is kind of diving into those weird feelings and the dichotomies that are at play there. So finally, when Omar al-Bashir is deposed in 2019, as the result of popular protests that had largely started for economic reasons. And some people will say it didn't just start in 2019 or in 2018, like in Atbara, it's been going on for decades, ever since Omar al-Bashir was in power. Many of the subjects of the film, their parents had moved to the United States towards the beginning of Bashir's 3-decade regime. When this stuff is happening, I felt this was a huge moment, again, and that sort of mixed feelings thing. It's whoa, Sudan is entering a time of political uncertainty. Things are unstable. The Sudanese pound has undergone inflation like you wouldn't believe. I remember going to the black market, Saudi trading spot and Shad al-Mashtad or something and Khartoum, and changing, I could get, 4 or 5 pounds to the dollar. And that was against the official rate that you should be exchanging at. And then in my most recent trip, it was 20 something, and people were 20, what? It's 50, it's 60, it's 70 pounds to the dollar, all within a really short space. So a lot's going on. To me, it's a huge moment. It's geopolitically important, in terms of international news, because it's Africa. It's what was the largest country in Africa before the separation of North and South Sudan. And it's also Arab world, Middle East in general, the implications of Sudan with a popular protest deposing its ruler of 30 years, to me was the biggest point of news, and it's not in international media. I mean, literally you'd go by the New York Times the day after Omar al-Bashir was deposed. And of course, the military council jumped in fairly quickly after that to establish rule. You have to flip through and get to the international section and then go deeper just to find this. And I thought this would be front page news everywhere. So I thought something should be done about it. Instead of actually going and filming the politics behind this, or actually going to Sudan, because there's no way that I was going to be able to I already have a tough time getting a visa to Sudan. I'm not going to get a visa to Sudan going to film a subversive film in the middle of the revolution.
Right.
I was damn, if I'm feeling this right now, and I'm not even Sudanese, I wasn't raised in Sudan, I don't have parents from Sudan, what are my Sudanese friends abroad who are cut off from revolution? What are they feeling right now? They must be feeling terrible. They must be feeling very vulnerable. They have
Right.
family members back in Sudan at risk.
Right.
Many of them are artists. They have platforms. They're supposed to say something,
Right.
but what can they say safely that could actually help people instead of putting them in danger? And that's the genesis of this film. So I started getting in touch with those friends who were artists, musicians, poets, to hear their stories, see what it was like psychologically to watch this revolution from afar.
No, that's great. And I think in part of a few things, one of the things that you said about it not being covered by the media, I think part of the reason why it was and is remarkable is that it was by a populace that was unarmed. It was peaceful sit-in. It was in every which way, kind of every revolution in terms of like ones that you dream about, ones that you think about what a true revolution by the people should be. And yet, like you said, it was not being given any kind of attention when you consider other things that happen in Sudan, like how much attention the negative gets, right? So it was for all of us kind of one of those things where you felt like you had to try to speak about it and give um, due or respect where respect is due, but also like you said, this kind of feeling of helplessness. And I think one thing that is important about the film is that it basically documented that period of time. Now, the revolution is ongoing. I don't know where we'll be in 5 years, but at least you've captured or encapsulated this moment, right, where people, abroad are able to express and see like how inspired, I think we all are. People on the ground and us away, we're all kind of looking at the same thing in awe of each other. Mostly actually of people on the ground, but just as a Sudanese people, I think for the first time in a long time, there's national pride, and realizing like, wait, we do come from strong, right? We do come from something that is beyond, just the ordinary. And it's like, I mean, as you know, from being in Sudan and that culture, it's like when a Sudani, like Big Farras, like when he decides or she decides she doesn't want to do something, it's like so difficult. But in this case, it actually became our strength, right? Our ability to just be like, nope, we are not going, we are not, moving until something changes is actually kind of our strength. Um, so I think for that, thank you, because I do think that it encapsulates a moment in time that I think we all will look back at. And I think, if you've lived through this moment, no matter how old you are, you will remember and know where you were and how you felt. Um, I do think I would like to hear more about, so once you started making the film, were there things that surprised you in what you've heard from some of these? I knew I did read the interview that you did before, and you said you knew some people that were friends of yours, but then you've also got to meet some other kids of the diaspora, if you want to put it
Mm-hmm.
that way. Was there anything that surprised you about the journey or or things you found out during your journey?
Oh man, man. Okay, first of all, it is an honor to talk with you about this because your depth of connection to the revolution obviously is infinite. So
Mm.
it means a lot to receive such deep questions. So I didn't thank you. It means a lot to me. I
Oh,
just
oh
express that.
no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Man, I think were there things I didn't expect, things that surprised me. Even though I had a hunch, I probably wasn't ready to see that identity, which for me had been such a big issue. Where do I fit in? Do I fit in anywhere? Do I belong here? What if I don't look like I belong here? Do I fit in there? What if I don't look like
Right.
I belong here? Do I fit in here? The performativity of identity, the ideas of belongings, the feelings, the amount that language plays a role in those answering those questions.
Right.
See it resonated so strongly in the characters of this film was something very validating for me making the film. But it also raised the profile of this whole issue of dual identities or hybridized identities or
Right.
multifaceted, multicultural identities. It was very powerful to see. One of the most powerful scenes that was not scripted, it wasn't anticipated, is when two of the characters, who are both Sudanese diaspora, Ilaf and Hajar,
And how
have
did
met up
you?
in Denver and they're in conversation and talking about their role as Sudanese diaspora in advocating for the revolution, but not just the revolution now, for past events and past atrocities. Hajar's families from Darfur, Ilaf's from, I believe, Khartoum, Northern Sudan in general, and how Ilaf has the courage to admit that she had been wrong in kind of brushing under the rug what her fellow Sudanese citizens had undergone during the Bashir regime, largely in an attempt to paint a positive picture and say, hey, life's complicated. You know, there's rebel movements, there's armed movements in Sudan and the fringes, and particularly this case in Darfur. It's war, that kind of thing. I felt called out myself while filming, you know, and several times during this film, I'm almost crying, moved to tears, listening to what the people were saying in front of the camera. In this moment, I felt called out because I had done the same thing. You know, I wanted a positive picture of Sudan. No, it's better than Chad. No. Like, you know, these people are awesome, they're great. But to trade, like I said, essentially what you're doing is you're trading that stability of, oh, it's great, you know, people are cool, you know, it's a great country. This is just complicated. You're trading that stability, or for the price of that stability, you're still having people's lives at risk, and people are still suffering as a result. So I felt personally implicated. I was not expecting that.
Now that was a beautiful moment, and I think for me it's of so many layers because, you know, on one aspect, from Ilaf's point of view, someone from the north of Khartoum, you don't trust so much of the media. You understand that, especially the narrative on Sudan has been negative. You understand that usually in general in really or Africa is seen a certain way. So, and within the country itself, the government is not reporting accurately. And so if you have family on the ground, you're not, unless someone has been affected directly, you're fed this kind of lie. At the same time, I think for me, someone who's been you know, removed and able to have met people from, you know, the Nubia Mountains and people from South Sudan and people from, you know, Darfur, here, you understand, oh, wow, you know, I had that moment of reckoning as well earlier on when I first met people, and I've talked to them, and, you know, would say to me like, will I be hurt if I come to Khartoum? Will I be killed? And I was like, what are you talking about? And I had to sit and think, wow, you know, I've denied you your story. It's not just, like you said, part of it is wanting to accept and feel like, no, I know the narrative. I represent my people. Like, I know what I've lived, but I could have been the same age and lived the same time as someone else and yet had a very different experience. And part of what we don't realize, or, you know, any majority doesn't realize, is that you're asserting that your reality is the only thing that matters really is denying or saying to someone else that yours isn't valued or seen. And I think once we recognize that, that allows more understanding, right? So it's kind of like our equal assertion of like, no, be quiet, this isn't the right thing. Or not, we might not even say be quiet. You might be like, I don't understand. That's not what I saw, when someone else is telling you. And I think the most powerful moment that for me is when Hajar had said, you know, why would I make this up? You know, why would I make this up? Do you feel me now? Like, do you understand me now? Now that, you know, and you've tasted this much, you know, like Khartoum, and, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever way you want to, it has tasted this much of what the rest of Sudan, north, south, west, and east has felt and continues to feel. So yeah, that was a very powerful moment. And I think I loved it just because it wasn't, and I think this is part of a generational thing, I think in just this younger generation in general, but also I think is also a reflection of diaspora, is the quickness to which there is a self-correction, right? I think with us older generations and just in general in the past and what America is dealing with now is there is this, I don't know if it's not necessarily ego, but it's this lack of willingness to accept, you recognize you're wrong, self-correct, and then come to terms with it. But that happened like that in that moment. And I think that was the bar. So it wasn't just that she told her that she saw her and she was and then said an apology, but then it physically extended herself and said, let me give you a hug. And they both kind of felt that pain. And I was like, wow. So it was like 3 steps, right? Like I expected, okay, maybe one thing would happen and maybe she would then apologize, but then to apologize and to reach out and then just truly mean it. I was like, wow, that was definitely a breakthrough. And I think part of what the film uncovers, and I think Sinkane does a lot of this,
Hmm.
which is gives the bird's eye view, which is for, what the diaspora does, or what leaving a place does, is it gives you a better view and an opportunity to connect to people
Hmm.
culturally from different cultures, backgrounds you might not have been able to when
Hmm.
you were in a place that has been now since Bashir separated people again based on tribe.
Hmm.
And so in doing so, then you're able to kind of get a better understanding and a view of like, wait, we're so connected in so many ways, and start to say like, what does that identity mean?
Hmm.
um, and for anyone, not just from Sudan, but then when it's specific to Sudan, a country which is already so um, you know and again, Sinkane I think says it beautifully, which is we are, what makes us Sudan is our difference, right? Like, we are made of everything, every shade, every height, every mother tongue, and that's what really is our strength. And yet that's kind of what has been used to separate us. So
Hmm.
um, so I want to get back to kind of what you were saying. My follow-up question to what surprised you is, how has this helped you in terms of your reconciling those kind of issues of identity in you in making this film? Or has it, I should say, that's an assumption I'm making, but has it helped you reconcile some things about your identity?
It has. It's been very helpful.
Yeah.
Oh man, I even talking about it now and going this deep with it, I get emotional thinking about it, and I get emotional thinking about these unexpected moments that happened, the things that you mentioned. Sim Kane. Sim Kane was phenomenal throughout the
Yeah,
discussions. He's involved in
he
two of
really
them,
was.
um, and said some things that I thought were very profound. Some among the quotes are sort of, hey, look around the room here. There's a lot of diversity. Talking about also the conference that they were attending. There's a Sudanese-American public affairs conference happening in Denver, Colorado. This
Right.
is, I would have been there regardless. Like, forget the
Right.
film. You know what I'm saying? Like, and and he says, Sudan's a land of difference. Exactly what you're talking about. And the revolution's giving us this chance to say that we're all Sudanese. Like, that's the answer to that question. Like, do you belong? Are you Sudanese? Are you Sudanese enough? There's a theoretical question one of the participants posed midway that was like, I don't know if it made the final cut of the film, but if someone's grandfather in Australia was Sudanese, and they're like, genetically they're like 2% Sudanese, and they claim to be Sudanese, are they Sudanese? Can they make that claim? And I think the answer that gets sort of tossed around is it's a personal choice. No one
Right.
person has the authority to say you are this or you are not this. It's an individual
Right.
choice to an extent, but it's complicated. And what's impacted me particularly is, I'm always going between, for lack of a better term, East and West, America, the Gulf, Sudan, Chad, UK, France, whatever. And the idea of diaspora is huge, to the extent diaspora is it's kind of like saying recently these people, this group moved here from another place recently, right?
Right.
But in many cultures, many civilizations, over time, that narrative disappears, for good and bad, right? In a bad way, like in the case of the United States with slavery and the horrific legacy of slavery. The erasure of that history is, it's a sign of white supremacy, a sign of thinking that to be white is right, and anything else doesn't really matter. In a good way, not with slavery, but in a good way, eventually the definition of what citizen means will change in a country. So I don't think France is there yet, but if you visit Paris today, you're going to be like, whoa, in some parts of Paris, the majority of people around me they don't look like the Français de souche, the like traditional white French people, or the Gaulois, or they're a Moroccan background, Algerian,
Right.
Congolese, Senegalese, this kind of thing. So at some point, to be French is to be all of those things together, and that I don't personally mind. I think that's the belonging that is accomplished with that's pretty cool. But with Sudan, in the middle of the revolution, I could see there was still tension between like Sudanese and Sudan and diaspora, especially in the fallout, especially after like lives were like directly on the line as much. I have a good friend who, he's probably mad at me for always mentioning this, but someone tweeted out, "Will the Sudanese diaspora shut up?" Shut the F up, actually. And I was like, man, wow. Like, I've just spent a summer with these people who are on the verge of tears every other day trying to advocate for Sudan. And I understand there's could be some self-promoting reasons sometimes. Some people like to come out with a t-shirt brand for the revolution or something, right? Or
Right.
someone gains popularity throughout the revolution because they're saying a lot of controversial stuff. But still, these people are, there's a lot of really well-intended people who are advocating for what they view as their homeland, their cousins, their friends, their place where they view they belong. Their parents moved them to America largely in some shape or form of the American dream, like it's going to be a better place. And many of these people are asking, is it time for me to move back to Sudan? And this is like fascinating. So to hear Sinkane, to hear Bayader, Khadija, Rami, all these people go through these questions of where do I belong, and in the end it's my choice, and I can answer that for myself, was empowering for me myself, who I don't completely fit in Chad. I don't completely fit in the United States. I'm an outsider. I lived in Saudi Arabia before coming to the US for my PhD recently. And in Saudi Arabia, I had American white privilege and I had Chadian go F yourself experience. If I appearing to people, they're like, oh, wow, he's light skinned. He's, are you Syrian? Are you Turkish? Are you, what? Oh, American. Oh my God, American. Oh, I have a cousin in Houston. Right. And then if I open my mouth, they'd be like, why do you talk like that? You don't, no, you don't need to speak like that. No. It's not funny. It's not funny.
Right.
Yeah, just
Right.
So I hope the world can open more discussions of this complexities of identity and the hybridities that are there. I think it's going to help us solve a lot of our problems.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of Sudan, sorry, this is a subject that I fix myself in this chair so I won't make any more crazy sounds. I think in Sudan, we're a recent immigrant population, if you really look at globally, right? And this is something that I've in other films and other things I've kind of tried to delve into, which is, if you really look at our history, most people in Sudan started migrating because of issues of politics, right? We're pretty happy. I mean, we gained independence in '56, which was recent. And then you consider like the first kind of generation, Azhari and all those, people had a lot of national pride and things were going okay in the '70s, all right, in the mid, then in the '80s, stuff, started to kind of percolate. And people started to get threatened and have to move for, real reasons. And so that fight or that kind of discussion or dichotomy exists because I think we are so recent, and so it's really difficult on both ends, and I can see that on both ends. And if you're connected in any way still to Sudan, that you walk around with this guilt that you cannot get rid of because from everything. I mean, I'm more in the arts and stuff, and I'm one of four, but I have cousins. My mother's one of 14. I have lots of cousins, and I know that when they look at me, I'm sure at times they're like, you got the opportunity to go to America and be anything. You're into the arts. I'm sure that's kind of like, what? You know what I mean? Like, and so every decision you make, everything you do is with this idea and knowledge of what others are not able to have and do. At the same time, I completely get it. And I think someone in the film said it. I think it was Rami who says, we have the right to have an opinion, right? But we don't have the right to dictate or to tell the world what should happen to people on the ground. And I think that sums it up for me in a really nice way, which is, I will fight for my right to have my opinion because I am still part of you, and I am still part of that country. But I completely understand that I should not dictate what should happen, as I have not lived it every day, and don't know all like the nuance. And I'm not, I have threats, the same thing that they were saying about their family. You don't want to do anything too much on this end because you know that people can get, you're connected and people can get hurt on the ground from my possible irresponsible actions. But at the same time, when you see them, and I mean, the Sudanese population, man, woman, child, grandmother, everyone on the street, it does embolden you, and it does make you think, I can go out and I should do more. And sometimes I can see how that could also be seen as like, sit down, take a seat. You're not here. I understand you want to help, but take a seat, you
Mhm.
know. So, but it's difficult because at the same time, we are left with this helplessness and willingness and wanting to help, but it's not knowing how. And so, and I think it's like, you know, any situation where there's a lot of love, there's a lot of kind of conflict, because that bond is still so strong. We're only the most maybe two generations really of people. You know, you have the generation like mine, our parents who moved here, but all born in Sudan. You have the
Mhm.
next generation like me who was born there, but then has lived most of my
Mhm.
population, most of my years outside. And then you have
Mhm.
the population now that's coming of age that has been born here, but of Sudanese parents. That's
Mhm.
really it. You know, I have a child now, other people have children. They're going to be the generation of completely born out of, born
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
outside of Sudan, two, generations back of people who've actually lived there.
Wow.
And that's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens with them. But yeah, but I think, like you said, I think it's a conversation we need to continue to have. And I know that for me, I actually attended the Khaled Al um, book launch in New York that you filmed at. So I
Oh, nice.
was there, yeah. And I know that, even before it, people had just kind of, they invited people to talk from the audience about, you know, just any experiences they've had. And I had friends, very close friends of mine, get up and speak, and I didn't never heard them express themselves this way. But I think it was a moment of healing in a lot of ways, because
Mhm.
I think once you have this common enemy, or once you have something that causes you to care so deeply and just really reconnect, you kind of, you know, just take everything else off that has been
Mhm.
holding you back, and or say, F that, I am Sudanese. Like, I want to be there. I connect. I feel that pain. Like, I
Mhm.
cry when I look at, what's happening. I get a call about an uncle being shot or someone, and you start to be like, no, these are my people suffering, and I need
Mhm.
to, and it reconnects you in a way that I think takes any fear or a trepidation or issues of identity out, out the
Mhm.
window,
Mhm.
because you are genuinely connected and you feel genuinely connected.
Mhm.
Um, but like, again, back to what, the film, but it is kind of that thin line between making that connection and reconnecting versus feeling like I am now going to either profit from it or speak on everything and be, this the voice on it.
Mhm.
Um, while still trying to give light to what's happening. And so
Mhm.
it's a delicate balance that we're all kind of trying to make sure we stay on the line that we think is best. But let's get into funner stuff. There's a lot of great music that you uncover in the film. What was your experience with some of, like, especially like that song at the end? It's called, I think, Sudan Cipher or Sudanese Cipher.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
remember the exact name. Is fire. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, like, what was that for you? Or were you familiar with some of these artists before, or how is that kind of, dealing with those, or hearing that kind of music and stuff? Mostly hip
Yeah.
hop, right? It seems like it's mostly hip hop that's coming out.
Yeah, so there's a mixture. Yeah, there's largely hip hop and spoken word that happens in
Right.
the film. And actually, Rami's interesting because Rami's a rapper who only almost solely performs a cappella, like spoken wordish style.
Mm,
That's a conscious choice he talks about in the film. Well, I guess many of the artists I had known just through Instagram,
right.
and I'd listened to them for varying degrees. I guess my longest standing friendships in the film would be Rami and Odyssey, Amir Khalifa,
Who
who,
I love is so good. So
yeah,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
who's in New York, and Rami has been based in Kansas City and had acted in Faisal Goes West, which was like, lack of a better term, like my coming out film of the Sudanese diaspora. Like, like many
Watch
people
your
know me.
words. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, yeah. Hey guys, I'm like, I don't know how I
No
identify.
judgments. No
Yeah,
judgments.
yeah. And so that was a film that, like this one, dealt with migration, but in like a sort of a fictional standpoint. So it's this idea of a family coming to the U.S. for the American dream and then hitting a wall, and looking at the complexities of identity that emerge from that. And Rami had acted as the main character there. So so I was familiar with his work for a long time. and with Odyssey, and then also Sinkane. Sinkane was someone who I discovered during the Faisal Goes West times when we were like reaching out to different artists and stuff, and a lot of people were getting in touch to be part of that film, Faisal Goes West. And one of my producers on Faisal Goes West had mentioned Sinkane to me, and I was like, Sinkane, what is this name? Like, what Sudanese artist is called Sinkane? Come on, like, you're pulling my leg. We're talking like 7th generation Sudanese at this point or something. And and then I shit you not. So like it's one thing to like come to someone's work because of their cultural connection. And Odyssey will actually talk separately about how he doesn't want to be known just as like, Sudanese artist or Sudanese-American artist. For example, in Sudan, he would prefer to perform in Sudan, not because, oh my God, look, it's our diaspora child coming back, just because of the quality of his music, right? And the connection that evokes among people. And so the cool thing with Sinkane is that I was in a coffee shop and I Shazammed a song one day and it was Sinkane.
So that's like, funny.
I was like,
yeah, I can't escape it, right?
There's some deep, I don't know what was going on, some kind of like,
that's funny.
Afro funk influence, something. This is nice. And I Shazammed it and it was Sinkane. I'm like, oh damn, okay, now I see it. And with Sinkane, his music is not hip hop actually. Yeah, so it's sort of playing towards more of the West African. There's a very strong connection between like Caribbean and West African music, especially like salsa, a lot of 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot of crossover compilations and albums that were happening in those parts. And I got to know Sinkane's music even better while seeing him perform throughout this film and hearing him talk about the impact on his music. And I even, I took friends in Colorado where I'm doing my PhD to go see a Sinkane concert after this film was made and stuff. So it's really cool. In each of those situations, he does the same thing. Before he performed his music, he engages with the audience and talks about why he feels he should at least give them. He says, all I can do really at this point is to talk to you about what's going on in Sudan with the revolution. And then now it's on you to go out and learn more and see if there's something that you need or want to do. So that was really nice. And Sinkane and I roomed together in Colorado during the conference. Okay. So we were up talking about, he came up to me, and actually in New York, even before that, and was like, I hadn't really felt a connection to someone's story as strongly as when I heard yours. And in many ways we're flipped, right? Like I went from America to Chad, he came from Sudan to America. But I don't know if it's our age or like the parts of the US our families had lived in or were from respectively or what, but there's a deep connection there. And I think my brother, there's another me, there's my brother, he's here too, Harun or Aaron in English. And he and I had kind of different experiences growing up in Chad where we had different friends, and those friends determined our identity more. So like our cultural perspective, our accent in Arabic is even a little bit different based on the friend sets we hung out with. So it's cool to see the complexities of that. With the music specifically, favorite scene for me is this impromptu freestyle in the parking lot of Red Rocks Park in Colorado. Right. We were trying to go to the mountains. I live in Colorado now. What we did was not very mountainy. It was just like on the side of Denver. And we got there and the park was closed. So we're like, oh, screw it. We've come this far. Why not turn up some music and freestyle? And that was just a blessing, man. That was like unforeseen. And all those people, people that otherwise would not have really met were not for this conference. We had Jesus Zen from UAE, as well as Taib or Bogi, who was there, both performing at the conference. Even Ihab, who's not a rapper, tried his hand at freestyle.
Who's unbelievably tall. I didn't realize.
G Saleh, this whole crowd. And actually Bayadr has spoken very eloquently about this since the film has come out. Bayadr is there in her hijab. And there's different Tarha and hijab, man. She's like dancing, getting into the flow, everything. And she talks about how much that scene for her in her mind, it's already going through her mind. I might appear on screen dancing as these guys rap, and I can already imagine like the Sudanese uncle response to this, but I don't care. This is a part of me. So it's just fun. It's fun. Like I shared it with my family, just my mom and dad. I really haven't watched the film with anyone because of COVID, so it's always been screening virtually. So I finally watched it with my parents, and during that scene, and people are dropping like F-bombs and like the N-word and all this kind of stuff. And I look over at my parents, and my dad's sitting here. I can see his socks just like moving up and down, like. So The music in the film, like me, it makes me happy. I'm sure it makes a lot of other people happy too. So I'm very, very grateful that everyone performed.
Yeah, and I think what you said too is, which was, again, it happens organically in the film, is you see all these different aspects of not just, um, like you see in terms of just depth of faith or spectrums, right? Of, like you said, someone in a hijab who is still connecting to hip hop and freestyling, to poets, to, um, as well as even in the circle when you were having the women
Mm-hmm.
talk.
Mm-hmm.
And just what their relationship was to Sudan, and even in English, the different accents of what, like, where, what country, what parts of the country they were raised in, etc. So I think it does that, and there's a lot that it shows, um, without really making it a very, like, or beating you over the head, right? You just kind of,
Mm-hmm.
in understanding the story, you get to see a spectrum, which is a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so is there anything else about the film that you want to kind of, since you said you haven't really had the opportunity to speak as much about it as it does the festival circuit, anything else you want either people to know, or you kind of want to, people who watch it, to kind of have as either background or understanding?
Well, definitely. Well, I'll take the opportunity to speak to the African Film Festival audience here and say that I really do want to engage more with it. So if someone has even a school, I mean, my dream would be to take this tour to both universities, but even high schools, to be able to engage with students who are going through some sort of balancing of identities. I think it's all over America, and we're not really talking about it. So if anyone wants to organize a screening, be it virtual or later on, preferably in person, uh, I'm readily available for that. So I hope my email address is somewhere around here, but definitely bentley@aboudigin.com. So ABOUDIGIN.com. Reach out so we can keep the conversation going. In another sense, it's very valuable for me to hear the feedback of people whom this film has affected. And I think there are areas of comparison today that go way beyond Sudan or the Sudanese revolution, but to revolutions of all shapes and forms. In a way, many people are watching some revolution from afar, and they're dealing with these questions, the same questions. Should I post something? Should I do something? Am I implicated in this? Should I be involved? Does this affect me? Does this not affect me? These kind of things are happening for many events and many revolutions around the world, in both the ideological and cultural and physical and violent sense.
Right.
So I love to hear feedback. So I really want this film to have a life.
Have you shown it to any of the people in the film yet? Have they seen it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh, they have. Okay. And what was their feedback in general, kind of?
Yeah. For many of the participants who really opened up during these discussions, they reflected on the discussions themselves as almost like a counseling session. It was kind of like group counseling in a way. You get to hear the perspective of others while you're growing and learning, but also being very emotionally vulnerable and feeling validated, like feeling someone's heard me.
Right.
So to watch the final edited version was similarly empowering, and a little bit like I'm very honored they trusted me too. Like, oh my God, wow, I was really open. And it's really interesting to see other people being affected by this scene. I think, again, major props to Ilaf and Tahajir, who really opened up during that scene. And everyone else has, extreme emotional vulnerability. I mean, Khadija's poem that is a motif throughout the film, she tells a story of going back to Sudan and her passport being American. She's getting funneled to the foreigners line and stuff. I was crying filming that. Like as she was finishing, I was in tears already. And I can only imagine that it's difficult for her to revisit that poem. She's performed it for some online events since then, but that it's also very satisfying to have people hear that.
Right.
So that's
as
been
well
really
as,
yeah.
Yes, I was going to say, as well as Rami, with his cousin, right? That seemed to be a moment where he, you can just feel the pain, the rawness of it. Yeah. And I was going to add, that's actually interesting you said that, because I was going to say that it did feel like they were very comfortable with you. And I didn't know how much of it you were filming versus someone else, but you can kind of feel this, like you were a fly on the wall, right? A lot of times
Mhm.
there wasn't, you didn't feel like, oh, they're either performing or they're very aware of the camera. It was more like you're engaging with
Mhm.
them, which I think was, however that was achieved, I think that helps a lot in terms of conveying just the raw emotion of what they were going through at the time. Yeah.
And that's a huge thanks to Makawi, who is a Denver-based Sudanese-American filmmaker, who joined as a co-producer and helps film a lot of those moments as well. So with
Nice.
Makawi and I, we were brainstorming some of the questions that would be asked during the discussion, and intentionally, we wanted us, like our voices and presence, to be just behind the camera and not interfering at
Mm,
all with the room. So questions were on like note cards, and we'd either alternate or have like a kind of a host read the questions and prompt
right.
conversation, with a decision later about how much to actually show the note card or make it as if it was a constructed, structure in that way. And Makawi was very helpful in imagining some of those questions because, for me, like I want to create a space for diaspora voice. Well, sorry, I think that everybody's voice is valid,
Right.
and I value that, and I think there's something even personally for me, like I want to be accepted. When I go back to Chad or Sudan or Saudi Arabia, even where I was living for, I want to be a human. I want you to care for my opinion, for it to count at a bare minimum level. So sometimes I wouldn't actually be maybe as critical even in constructing the questions as I should have been. And Maccabi was very helpful actually to kind of take things another step further and
Interesting.
say, hey man, like, keep it in mind that kind of like what Rami was talking about too, that these questions of agency and authority and, the implications of your words. Maccabi was able to enrich the questions we were asking and to make sure they were going as deep as we wanted as well. So.
I have two last questions. One, which you just kind of helped me prompt, which is because you speak about the acceptance of wanting to be accepted when you go back to like a Sudan or Chad or
Mhm,
UAE even. Um, in terms of being American, do you
mhm.
identify as that, or do you feel like you feel accepted here, or do you have the same need, I should say, to feel accepted in being American, and or how do you feel like that might be different than
Yeah. Wow.
versus?
I've never been asked this question. I love it.
Do I
It's
win a prize? I'm just
major,
kidding.
major. Yeah, yeah. Next film is Sarra from Afar. It's gonna be like discussion. I define so what an answer. I define white supremacy as as white is right kind of thing. Like I think if we tempt ourselves and say, oh, white supremacy in America is just KKK, like extremism and whatever, that we're actually still enabling white supremacy because
Mm,
we're ignoring just this subconscious even belief that the white way and culturally, not just phenotypically or skin color, but like the sort of like white culture way of doing things is the right way to do it.
mhm.
And that plays into phenotype. It plays into how someone looks as well. So I, largely speaking, don't stick out in America. I'm anonymous, and in some ways that kind of means I belong, or I have a default path to belonging. When same thing like with my Arabic accent in the Arab world, I look one way and I sound another. Here, when I start to speak, not my accent in English, but the things I say or the things that I want to talk about or whatever, they don't fit in with people's preconceived notions of like what a typical white guy should be talking about or something, right?
Right,
So I
right.
actually get a lot of pushback, to be honest. A lot of people are very their awareness is heightened about how they are being perceived or how others are being perceived, and that kind of thing. So you encounter a lot of judgment and stuff too. So I would like to fit in that sense, that I can be a white person who grew up in Chad, whether or not it was my own volition. I went as a kid, but I think irrelevant, right? That informed who I am, and
Mm,
what I am is not maybe what you may assume. And I think that's important for me. But I can't deny also that I'm mostly anonymous here. And the belonging back in Chad or Sudan or Saudi Arabia, these places, is yeah. After I've been talking and people know me, then they're like, it's almost an overreaction. It's like, oh, ده واحد منا يا أخي، ده ولدنا. Like this dude is like one of us. This is
right,
amazing. It's very affirming for people because they're used to that stereotype of like white people causing war, and like
right.
exacerbating tribalism or whatever the stereotype is. And then here's this
The
dude who's like,
colonial, colonizer, I should say.
uh-huh.
Right. Yeah.
And here's this dude who like straight up, you know, sits down and has a very serious addiction to like jabana, like, you know, he eats too much of this. Well, yeah, I grew up with that. It's part of me. It's very comforting for people to see that. But I definitely stick out visibly. I'm not anonymous in those places. A lot of it is reflected in privilege there as well, right? Like I get the benefit of the doubt for some things, maybe not for all things. As a kid, I stuck out a lot, so I wanted to be a chameleon and fit in. And my brother and I were like the only white kids in the town. We didn't grow up in the capital city. We grew up in Ati, in the middle of Chad. So we're some of the only non-Chadian. I mean, there's some Libyan kids and, you know, Sudanese kids and stuff, but we stuck out a lot. And as kids, you know, it's a little bit different. You know, we got bullied a lot, actually. You know, I've had people throw rocks at me. I've had a knife to my throat, like all kinds of stuff, just trying to fit in as a kid. I got a fight with a kid, tried to like rip his eye out.
Oh, wow.
I mean, as a kid, it's shit you're doing.
Yeah.
And then I apologized to him and he apologized to me. And then he went and stabbed another kid on my brother's behalf. Not my brother did not request it, but like out of honor, you know, like that's kids' belonging issues, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So yeah, I wish I could like meet people and have a deep connection immediately. I wish like we got beyond those face value assumptions. And that's probably true for a lot of people. So
I feel you. That gives you more empathy though. I mean, I think that makes you empathetic, right? And that's something as a filmmaker, that's something you can use, right? So I look at it as a superpower. Yeah. So my last question will be, just because I think we're getting long on time. So what's next? What do you want to do next? Or where do you see, you know, yourself in terms of movies or, you know, films?
Yeah. So this film has been awesome. It's kind of like, I've worked on some features before. This is like, it's maybe my first solely produced, with the help of Makawi and others, production, and directed feature-length film that's gone out. So I'm using Revolution from Afar as a way to learn more about film sales and distribution. Another plug, if anyone's watching this and they're a sales agent, or if they have like a streaming service that they want to talk about, I'm actually actively trying to meet everyone that does that, right? Because I want to be able to have that knowledge and those connections for future projects as well. It's a big issue to get these films out. These are not mainstream films, and I think they deserve to be in front of an audience. Everyone's films in this festival, for example, deserve to be streaming in front of an audience, just like any other Hollywood, you know, production or TV series, whatever. I have a feature that actually dives into home video from my childhood through adult years, and ask questions about this very issues of belonging. A lot of it's actually home video from the perspective of my brother and myself when we were kids in Chad, but also talking about like my parents' role in taking us to Chad and sort of like all these reflections I've had in terms of identity, also in terms of religion as well. So, and the feelings of loss and guilt. And you were mentioning earlier, like this idea that like everything I do, I wonder, oh my God, do my friends in Chad have the opportunity to do this? And that weighs heavily on me. So this film dives into that. Still working title phase, so I don't have the final title. I've been playing around with doctor, like a doctor. My dad's a doctor. But it's more about my brother and myself, so it might change a little bit. Yeah, so that's one. And yeah, I'm doing my PhD, so I'm gonna be writing about all these things.
What's your PhD in?
The department's called Critical Media Practices. So basically like making anything in terms of cultural media or entertainment media might be kind of a stretch, but I do think there's a value in people being able to consume what you make. Like I want Revolution from Afar to be relatable to really anyone that watches it. And things in which you make a statement, essentially, right? So I've really been challenged and been learning during the PhD program as to how do I communicate something in a short span of time effectively? How do I give a credit to past filmmakers and theorists and that kind of thing, while also advancing some ideas that might be perceived as new? These are questions I've been asking with that. And one of the things I've been looking at actually is there's this concept of disidentification, actually in the space of queer theory. So Jose Esteban Munoz wrote about this in a book called Disidentifications, and talked about how various groups of people advocating for gender identity, you could see how their decision or their affiliations actually shifted over time. And Jose Munoz argues that this is a political decision, that identity is largely political in some ways. If you think about it, like the reason you identify as something is because, well, or you identify within the space of a discourse, within the space of like a language that already exists, cultural notions about
Right.
what it means to be this or that, and then you identify, you know? Um, and so I find it interesting that the idea of this disidentification, that you might identify as something, you go through a period of time in which you might even feel rejected as that thing, and then move to
Right.
this other identity, and then even that doesn't fully encapsulate where you're going. That the only option left is to disidentify, or to kind of like try to carve a new path. That resonates with me
Yeah.
culturally as well.
Cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that
so
sounds
the
really
American
interesting.
question, which I had been asked and I didn't really answer it even to now, is I can't deny that I'm an American citizen. I can't deny that I'm
Right.
American in many ways, culturally, whatever that even means, even though American is infinitely diverse. But I also, to say I'm American Chadian, I think helps complicate that as like a short answer. But I think a nationality is not enough to define people.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. I think we'll see more of that as, because everyone is moving, migrating. So I think you're like, he's right. We are
yeah,
going to be having more of these discussions, I think, globally.
definitely.
Um, cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit and talk about your film and just yourself.